Okay, so welcome back to the channel, and in today's video I'm telling you everything you need to know about Nigerian Indian fashion designer Priya Ahluwalia. But before I continue, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter for all your fashion news at Fashion Roadman. So like I said earlier, Priya Ahluwalia is a British fashion designer based in London, but she's of dual national heritage from India and Nigeria. She studied fashion design and she got her BA from UCA, the University for the Creative Arts, and she got her master's at the University of Westminster. She gained prominence through her Spring/Summer 19 collection and a book called Sweet Lassie, which we'll get into much later. Last year, Priya Ahluwalia was also a joint LVMH prize winner. And aesthetically, I really like her work. You can see through her work that there are so many cultural references between all three places, whether we're talking about Britain, Nigeria, or India. And she has this unique way of mixing and merging the references together in a way that still looks cohesive. To quote something Ahluwalia actually said about this, she said, "My life is a patchwork of cultures and heritage, a mishmash and remix of traditional ideas of being Indian or British or Nigerian." And I think that completely summarizes basically what she represents. And even when it comes to her design techniques, whether she's using, patchwork techniques or certain Asian beading techniques, all these cultural references are very clear to see. In a wider sense, a bigger part of her work is focused on sustainability. And while she says that she doesn't want her brand to just be a brand that people just talk about because of the sustainability and not the actual references or how much work she puts into the designs. But I do think it's still important to talk about the sustainability that is involved within this brand, because I think it's part of the DNA of the brand. And that's why there's a lot of patchwork in her work, because she uses dead stock fabrics. And I'll get into later in the video why exactly she does that. So her Spring/Summer 19 collection, which was her first official collection and actually her graduate collection from Westminster when she was studying her master's, she wanted the collection to be sort of a commentary on how wasteful the fashion industry of today is. So what actually influenced this collection was Ahluwalia traveled to Nigeria to visit family members, and she was in the city of Lagos. Now in the city of Lagos, you normally see what we call in Nigeria street hawkers. These are normally lower class people who sell things on the street. So you might have seen pictures of them online where they hold stuff on their head, right? And she was quite inspired and intrigued by the clothing that they wore, because she noticed that a lot of them wore sweatshirts that said things that looked like they're from the West. So some people had England polo shirts, or some people had, shirts that had different companies based in England printed on them. I remember her saying specifically that she saw someone wearing a London Marathon t-shirt on the streets of Lagos. And that made her wonder, why exactly are they wearing clothes that looks like they're from the West? How exactly did this clothing go from the West to these street hawkers who are now wearing it? So eventually one day she stopped one of these street hawkers in Lagos and actually asked them how they got the clothing that they're wearing. And the person replied, basically explaining that these clothing items come from the West. So when people give stuff to charity, what normally happens is everything just gets dumped in Africa, essentially. The things that people want and the things that people don't want. So there's a huge amount of pollution in Africa, because normally what happens is when the UK charities really have no use for clothing, or they can't really sell it, then it all goes to Africa. And this kind of sparked her idea to kind of want to look deeper into the second-hand market, which led her to India. During her research, she found that a place in India called Punipat is actually the global recycling center for garments in the world. So she actually wanted to visit. So what she did was she visited and she learned a lot about the second-hand trade. And that kind of sparked her want and her need to kind of want to use archive fabrics and to, be more sustainable with her design, seeing firsthand the impact that fashion does have on the environment and the sheer volume of clothing that is already out there in the world. So when Ahluwalia first started this idea, she thought her clothing couldn't really encapsulate every single thing that she had experienced going to Nigeria and Lagos and going to Prinipat in India. So what she did was she had this idea to make a book, and this book is called Sweet Lassie. And in Sweet Lassie, she has documented images of all her travels and the reference images to everything. And this is everything from street hawkers to the recycling center in India and all the other reference images. It's a really interesting book, and this kind of came hand in hand with her collection. On an aesthetic level, I thought she hit the nail on the head when it came to this collection. First of all, Ahluwalia is known for making really good knitwear, and you can see that from this collection. There was a red shirt that was in this collection that I really liked, and I thought it was quite interesting that in the lookbook, the models were holding rolled up pictures that are from the book Sweet Lassie. That was quite interesting, and I think it's so fascinating how different people view different things. Because as a Nigerian, and I've lived in Nigeria for 6 years, when I look at the collection aesthetically, the reference to the street hawkers is so clear to me. But it's so funny because I have other people that have looked at the collection and they're like, oh, it's just patchwork clothes, but they don't get it because they can't understand the reference. But I don't think that's a bad or a good thing. I think a lot of designers like people to interpret collections in their own way. And I just also find it really fascinating that two people with two different lived experiences can look at the exact same thing and think completely differently about it. So yeah, I really love this collection. Even if you look deeper into this collection, these references to the street hawkers is on every single level. If you look at the footwear, I don't know if she meant to or not, but it looks exactly like the type of trainers that a street hawker in Lagos will wear. Literally, if anyone Nigerian is watching this, they will be able to attest to it. It's insane how well she was able to bring this message across, but in the same time, still make it a commentary on sustainability and just the excess of the fashion industry and her journey learning about it going from Nigeria to India. So moving on to her Fall/Winter 19 collection, this was really interesting because it was essentially a continuation of the last collection on the excess of the fashion industry. But she added different elements to it. This one was more based on her personal relationship with her family. And my understanding from looking at all of Priya Ahluwalia's work is that a lot of her inspirations and references comes from the people around her, whether it's community she grew up around or her family members or her friends. And this collection was no different. But of course, there was also an aspect of this collection that was about taking dead stock and, old clothing and repurposing it and turning it into something new and something that can be used for many years going forward. In an interview that Ahluwalia did about this collection, she was talking about how she has a lot of nostalgia because there are things that her family members have passed down to her. And she likes this idea of the fact that clothing can, last generations and go down from a grandmother to a mother to a granddaughter. And she feels that she wants her clothing to be viewed that way and something that's of a quality to where it could be passed down to people that are in future generations, which I really like. So she talked specifically about her mum passing down a leather bag to her, or her grandmother that gave her bangles that she wears on her wrist. And she said she can never sell these things because these things have more value than just like the cost of it. There's also the family ties and different things like that. And she actually did print she had this motif print that sort of did look like there were bangles and there were leather straps on the fabric, which was quite interesting. There are also direct references in this collection from old family photos, which I also did like. And I like, the communal feel of this collection. Once again, like the last collection, this collection, I loved the denim. I loved the knitwear. I loved the contrast stitching on the denim, actually. And what I did actually appreciate more than anything was there was this polo, this England polo. Now, I kid you not, because I think most of the stuff that goes from the West to West Africa is from England or the UK. So just like she said, you normally see street hawkers wear like London Marathon t-shirt or England football jerseys, like really retro England football jerseys. You see them wearing like England polos. So I love this England polo. It gives me so much nostalgia for the time I was in Nigeria. Just seeing people like dressed like that. I really love that. And I also love that she's added an extra touch to it with the beading technique that she used to give the polo an extra pop. Another reference to, of course, the secondhand clothing industry are track pants that look like the EU logo, which obviously makes sense when things are moving from Europe to West Africa. So I just like her attention to detail, and I think the biggest part of the attention to detail is in the aesthetic of it, the styling. And I even like how she had a collaboration with Adidas in this collection that continued into further collections. And I love it. It reminds me kind of like when Priya Ahluwalia had a collaboration with Converse, because it's very distinctive. And when you see those shoes, you know it's Ahluwalia. It's quite obvious. Moving on to the Spring Summer 20 collection. This is kind of like almost every single other collection. Like I said, Ahluwalia is someone that grew up in England, but she has Nigerian heritage. Her father is Nigerian, her mother is Indian. But on top of that, her stepdad is Jamaican. So Priya Ahluwalia as a person is quite literally a melting pot of cultures, which is why she loves to be heavily inspired by her culture. And to quote what she said about this, she said, "I have always loved looking through old family photos and analysing what everyone wore. I'm quite nostalgic and sentimental. And this sentimental idea is always why every single collection, it always still harkens back to her heritage. Because even the first two collections that were kind of a commentary on the excess of fashion, the reason why she embarked on that journey was because she went to Nigeria to visit family. And then she's from India, but she also found that Punipat is the, global recycling center for a lot of garments in the world. So it still all finds a way to tie back to either being British, being Jamaican, being Nigerian, or being Indian. And I love this, and I find it extremely authentic. And this sentimental value was something that seeped through the whole collection in her Spring Summer 20 collection. And in this collection, she took inspiration from what members of her family used to wear to garage raves in the UK in the 90s when she was a lot younger. And just the nostalgia of seeing, her older siblings and people in her family get ready to go to garage raves when she was too young to go to them, and kind of how she felt about garage raves at the time and how she really wanted to go but she never had the chance to. So through her brand, she's reliving these moments. But on top of that, she also took inspiration from what Punjabi people in London were wearing in the 1960s. And her mother's side is the Indian side. And of course, her mother's father, which is her granddad, was in London in the 1960s, wearing tailoring. And it's quite an interesting thing that I'll get into later about how immigrants used to dress in the early parts of the 1950s and the 1960s. But the references in this collection are quite interesting to me because I think Ahluwalia grew up at a time that was really the height of the UK garage music scene. It was like the early 2000s, the 90s. That was really the height. And I like that she's sort of recreating it in her own way in this sort of psychedelic, dreamy, like nostalgic way. So when talking about this collection, Ahluwalia said when she was younger, she would watch members of her family style themselves in things like two-piece sets, tracksuits, dresses with chain belts, patterned silk shirts, and these are all elements that are in this collection. And that's why I love her work, because her work, if you understand where the references are coming from or what time frame she's inspired by, you understand it. But then people that don't understand it, they just look at it and they see like tracksuits and they don't see how on point her aesthetic is when it comes to the time frame that she's referencing. And I find it so fascinating. And personally, I'm such a big fan of designers that, take inspiration from British subcultures. Some of my favorite designers do that. Like Ahluwalia, of course, I'm talking about, she does that quite frequently, but there are also people like Martine Rose or Grace Wells Bonner that do take inspiration from different subcultures at different time periods in Britain. I'm a fan of designers that do that because I grew up in London, so I understand the references. I do read up about a lot of British subcultures just because I find it really fascinating, and when I read up about it, I'll go to like the areas in London where everything happened and see how the area has changed. A regular feature we also see in Ahluwalia collections is polos of a country that relates to her. So we've seen the England polo that, of course, one was a reference to street hawkers, but of course it was also a reference to just her upbringing in England. And that's why now we have the Nigerian polo with the beading techniques, because of course that's a reference to her own cultural heritage. Like something she's always done, she used a few family photos to make some interesting prints, which I did like. Luckily, I actually got to see this collection in person because this Spring Summer 20 collection, I actually covered it for High Fashion Talk. So thank you to High Fashion Talk and YOLO. Because that was how I was able to get into Fashion Week for the Spring Summer 20 season. So continuing on the theme of this cultural nostalgia that Ahluwalia really loves, we can move on to the Fall Winter 2020 collection. Because in this collection, Ahluwalia looked deeply into the year of 1965, which was the birth year of her Jamaican stepdad. And of course, what she really wanted to look at deeply was how were Jamaicans dressing at the time, Jamaicans that were in England. And she wanted to merge the aesthetic of 1965 Jamaicans into this collection. And this is also something that we've seen similarly from Grace Wells Bonner, who also has Jamaican heritage, and she very much looks to the clothing and the aesthetic of the Windrush generation. 1965 in the UK was a time of a lot of political turmoil. So to give you some context onto how we got to this political turmoil in 1965, after World War II in the UK needed a workforce because a lot of people had died due to the war and a lot of infrastructure had been destroyed due to the war. So the British government had an idea to improve the workforce and build the workforce and kind of combat these labour shortages. So what they introduced in 1948 was called the British Nationality Act. And this gave members of Britain the right to work and settle in the UK if you were from a country that was a British colony. So one of the countries that Britain has colonized. So the country I'm from, which is Nigeria, is a British colony. So actually, that's why I'm third generation Nigerian in Britain, because my grandmother moved to London during this time of the British Nationality Act. So what happened was between 1948 to 1970, a lot of immigrants from British colonies, so places like India, Nigeria, and Jamaica especially, moved to the UK to help with the labour shortages. But the first flock of people did come from the Caribbean, especially Jamaica, and they came on a massive ship that was called the Empire Windrush, which is why they're called the Windrush generation. However, by the late 1960s, there was a lot of political turmoil because a lot of the citizens of Britain didn't like that there were so many immigrants starting to come to the country and that were allowed to stay. So it became a really big issue, and eventually the British government had to kind of scrap the whole British Nationality Act, and they stiffened immigration policy. More recently, there was a massive scandal when it came to the Windrush generation because a lot of these people that were part of the Windrush generation, they came at a time when Britain was in absolute ruins, and they helped to rebuild the nation. Which is so strange because then what the UK did was they found a loophole in sort of the passports and the citizenship status of a lot of the Windrush generation that they recently used to deport a lot of people from the Windrush generation back to where they came from, so back to like the Caribbean and stuff, which created a lot of talking points in the UK because people were saying, how can you deport these people who, one, you promised through the British Nationality Act that they are going to be given a stay, and then on top of that, these people helped to rebuild the country, and then some of these people fought in the war for Britain, and they still got deported. So there was kind of a big scandal around that. I'm sure you guys, if you're interested, you can read up more about the Windrush generation and all the things they've done and what happened in the scandal. I'm just telling you this just to give you context of like this collection. So there's a really good book that when I saw this collection, I really thought of. It's this book right here. It's called City of Spades. Now this book actually follows the life of a Nigerian immigrant moving to the UK in the 60s and everything that happened from different Jamaicans at the time that were in Britain to the Nigerians that he met to the Brits that he met, how difficult it was as a black person at that time. And what I found really interesting about this book was they talk a lot about how they used to dress, and they really describe deeply how they dress. And I find it interesting because the sense I get from this book is that the black people at the time, because Britain was so racist, they had to overcompensate because every small thing they would be seen as like criminals. So they thought that one way to get white people to accept them was to dress so well. So black people then were known for dressing so well. Even the white people in this book that were really racist all used to say that black people dress well generally. So you would see black people wearing really tailored suits, like the best tailored suits, secondhand shoes that look amazing and stuff like that, or tracksuits. And also this idea also, actually, it's a really good thing I'm talking about this. So in the UK, opposed to other countries, a lot of the time wear tracksuits that are like baggier or more comfortable. In the UK, especially in London, people wear like really fitted tracksuits. They almost look like tailored tracksuits. And where that comes from is around the 1960s, when a lot of black people, when they needed something more comfortable to wear, they still wanted to look stylish and chic, so they would tailor their tracksuits, because it's this idea of overcompensating and wanting to look so presentable for white people so they wouldn't be as racist to them, which is so interesting. And all these elements all tie into this collection that Ahluwalia has made. And that's where you get all these color block sweaters or the striped pants, or there were even these amazing quilted puffer jackets. But apart from that reference, there were also some Nigerian references in this collection. And how she found the aesthetic of this collection was she used reference images. So she found a lot of old images of the Windrush generation and what they used to wear. And she also found images of Nigerians in the past, like what they used to wear to church, because in Nigeria we have this concept of what we call like Sunday's best. Like everyone dresses their best on Sundays and wears their best clothes on Sundays, which is so interesting because I've read up so much about this stuff. The aesthetic is so clear. It's so evident in this collection. But the references don't end there. So on these quilted jackets, you sort of see these swirly lines on a lot of the jackets. What that is a reference to is how the wallpapers typically looked in the 60s and the 70s, and the designs were kind of swirly on wallpapers from the 60s and 70s in British houses that you normally see in the suburbs, which is so interesting. Like how rich the references are in this collection, it's actually insane. But I think what is most impressive to me about Ahluwalia's work, and this is in a general sense, not just this collection, but other collections, is how she has so many cultural references, whether it's from England or Jamaica or Nigeria or India, and it's just a cultural explosion. These are huge, rich cultures that she manages to just tie in together, and it looks cohesive. I think it takes a certain type of skill to do that, because I can imagine there are other designers that try to tie in all those cultural references together and it's just too much. And it just looks a bit too much, and it looks kind of out of place and not cohesive. And I think there's a skill that goes unnoticed in tying all these things together. Also, to quote what she said about this collection, she said part of the inspiration was London, what we call London swinging 60s. And that's also a reference to the jackets. And then also she said, in America, Martin Luther King was leading marches. In Asia, there was conflict raging with India and Pakistan. And what she actually said, to quote what she said, "I did a lot of research from my family's culture, art, music from Nigeria, London, India, and the Caribbean, and looking at a lot of blaxploitation movies." The last thing I have to say about this collection is sustainability, because I've kind of made it a point not to talk about sustainability in every single collection that I've been reviewing. However, it's a big piece of her work. I think it's a travesty if you don't give her credit for how sustainable her brand is. It's literally been sustainable from day one. That was the starting inspiration of her first collection. And I just need to give her credit where credit's due. So in my notes, I have that in this collection, for example, the jeans were found in a denim factory in Tunisia that uses organic and recycled cotton. The wiggle patterns on a lot of the pieces were lasered. She doesn't use bleach. She also said the color block sweaters were knitted from a really high quality yarn made from organic lamb's wool and recycled nylon. The beaded embroidery on the sleeves was also hand done with a social enterprise in India. And there were other pieces that were in collaboration with a company called Scoop, who are known for having loads of excess fabric that they want to get rid of, and it's where she sources a lot of her stuff from. Also, her Adidas collaboration, she said that Adidas is helping her with dead stock or damaged stock sneakers, so sneakers that normally would be thrown away or destroyed, and she's kind of repurposing those for her collection. So huge sustainability initiatives, and that's how it is in all of her collections, actually. I just don't want to harp on it too deeply. Now for her Spring Summer 21 collection, which is her most recent collection, this collection was titled Liberation, and really this collection was a response to everything that was happening, especially in terms of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement that was really huge last year. Really saw a resurgence. So in this collection, she actually collaborated with someone called Dennis McGuinness, who actually has a huge collection of archival sort of posters and printings and photos from like the 1960s, and she took a lot of these reference images from the 1960s protests in Nigeria, and she kind of infused it into her work. And it was also kind of partially also a commentary on the Black Lives Matter movement, because the protest of Nigerians in the 1960s came when it came to independence, because Nigeria got, well, I say we, but Nigeria got their independence on the 1st of October 1960 from the UK. So from that point onwards, it was no longer under colonial rule by the British. So of course, during that time, there was a lot of protest against the Brits from Nigerians, which I think is quite a timely reference when trying to, relate it to the current happenings in the world. This collection also doubles down as a celebration on her Indian heritage, and more especially and on a more deeper level, her Nigerian heritage. And I think this collection probably has the most Nigerian references of everything I've seen. And this is why I really wanted to review this collection, because no journalist has broken down the Nigerian references at all, which is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to have so much fun doing it. And while I've been a huge fan of the past two collections that came before this collection, I would say this is my favorite collection that she's made, mainly because of how rich the Nigerian references are. And this isn't really personal bias of me being Nigerian. This is more, it speaks to me as a person the most because I'm Nigerian, and because I understand the references and because I can see them. And so of course, if you look at some of the sweatshirts, they say Nigerian edition, which is quite an obvious reference to it being a commentary on 1960s Nigeria and just it being about Nigeria in general. And when you look at the sweatshirts have the colors of the Nigerian flag, which are green and white. On some t-shirts, we also see a print that says Liberation, but also has a print of African artwork. And it reminds me of the type of sculptures that artists used to make from Calabar in Nigeria. I'm not sure if that's specifically where this artwork is from, but that's what it reminds me of. So now, in my culture, my tribe is called the Yoruba tribe. Now, I don't specifically know what tribe Ahluwalia is, because there are so many tribes in Nigeria, it's endless if I had to try and start naming them. However, I would just go out on a limb and guess that she's my tribe, mainly because of things I've seen. I've seen her cultural, like on her Instagram page, she has reference images, and a lot of the reference images, they look like Yoruba people. Her family live in Lagos. And the references specific to this collection are Yoruba tribe references. So in my tribe, there is a very commonly used fabric. It's called aso-oke. And this fabric is mainly used in special occasions for Nigerians. So we use it in weddings, we use it for parties, we also use it for burials, because in my culture it's kind of strange, but I know like in Britain, for example, burial, when someone dies, it's seen as a really sad thing, and everyone's so mellow and everyone wears black and everyone's crying. In my culture, we take a different approach. So in Yoruba culture, we celebrate, we have a party when someone dies, because how we see it is we're celebrating the years that they did live on earth. So instead of being sad about it, let's be happy that at least they lived a good life, or they lived some years, or, you know, seeing the kind of trying to be optimistic at a dark time. So that's why we also wear like ceremonial garments during a burial, like really colorful garments. Aso-oke typically is a very high quality fabric, and I can see the references to aso-oke in this collection because a lot of the fabrics look like aso-oke, and there are a lot of Nigerian prints. Now, going deeper into my culture, Yoruba men, they wear this hat that's called a fila. Now, there are different types of fila hats, but the typical one that you normally see mainly worn is a fila hat that it's shaped like a cylinder. So it just goes up and then it kind of stops up at the top. Now, what was really, really interesting in this collection is the hats in this collection. She's mixed the fila hat with Western hats. So you see like a dad hat, but then the top of the hat looks like a fila hat. Or you see bucket hats, but the top of the hat looks like a fila hat. And why the reference is so obvious to this hat is because even though this hat is actually like, it goes straight up and then it kind of has a flat top, what a lot of Yoruba people typically do is they bend it to one side. It's just how we style the hat. And she's done that as well in this collection. She's bent it to one side. And I really love what she's done there. I found that really interesting. And when I was reading like reviews on this collection, no one pointed that out. Now, next I want to talk about Ahluwalia's second book, because I find the books that she makes very interesting. So in this book that's called Jalebi, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think that's how you say it, Jalebi. Ahluwalia wanted to make this book about Indians, and specifically the Punjabi community in Southall in London. Now, for those who don't know, when a lot of immigrants moved from India to London, a lot of them settled in an area in London called Southall. So when you go to Southall, it's almost like there are a lot of Indians. So if you like Indian food, you'll find a lot of Indian food there, or cooking ingredients. There are a lot of shops that have that there, or different Indian stalls, different things like that. So Southall almost has like its own big Punjabi community. And I know Ahluwalia's Punjabi because I looked at the history of her name, Ahluwalia, and it's actually a Punjabi name. So to quote what she said when she was talking about the book that she made, she said, "I love being mixed heritage. I'm Indian and Nigerian, and I'm also British. It's made my life rich and difficult at the same time. Lots of nice things have come from it, and lots of hard things have come from it. I wanted this book to be about Southall. I didn't want it to be an advert for Ahluwalia. I didn't want it to be a lookbook. Some of the people in the book are wearing my clothes because my clothes are inspired by people like them. It was important to show that the brand is about much more than selling clothes. I always visited Southall as a kid as it was the best place to get things for Indian cooking or Indian clothing. It used to be a big family day out and I enjoyed it so much. I started to realize as I was getting older that a lot of people in London had never heard of Southall, and I thought this was crazy seeing as we lived in the same city. Brexit had just happened, as well as the Windrush scandal, and there was an increasingly hostile environment for ethnic minorities. I wanted to create a piece of work that celebrated the beauty and diversity. And that in a nutshell basically breaks down the idea of Jalebi. What I'll do is I'll leave images on the screen as I'm speaking that are from Jalebi, but also if you want to buy the book, it's available. I think the second edition is available for pre-order on her website. I would buy it, but right now, the way my finances are set up, I can't afford it. But hopefully, if it doesn't sell out, I'm really interested in buying the book because I think the photography in it is amazing. The inspiration of it is so amazing. I just really want to support her work. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is Guccifest. I'm not sure how many people remember Guccifest. It happened quite recently, where Gucci were essentially doing this sort of like digital festival for Fashion Week, where they had a lot of up-and-coming fashion designers make fashion films, and Gucci promoted it on their platforms and posted the videos on their platform. So Ahluwalia was one of the people that was part of Guccifest, and she made this video. It's called Joy. And it's through things like this that you really understand the cultural influences in her work, because in Joy there were her Nigerian uncles and aunties that featured in the movie, and they were making jollof rice and fried plantain, like Nigerian food. And what this was supposed to represent, this Joy fashion film, was just the strength of black people in general. So in this fashion film, you see a lot of different types of black people, from like just her family to political figures to poets, people that do spoken word, many different types of black people, just kind of saying different things about like what it is to be black or Nigerian and different things. Of course, in this there were also references to her Caribbean culture that come from her stepdad, and she just kind of wanted to explore the nuances within, Afro-Caribbean culture and how it's navigated. And to quote something that she said, "These traditions not only connect us with our past, any dedication to them is more often than not an act of radical self-love. Through Joy, rituals so important to black communities such as food, hair, sports, and church are explored and celebrated in nuanced ways." Now, as I conclude, I really wanted to end with a quote that Ahluwalia has said about her work. And so this quote comes from GQ when they interviewed her, and they asked her a question. They said, "You don't like being labeled as a sustainable designer. Why is that?" And what she said was, "This is because I was just so bored of everyone talking about it. It's all everybody wanted to talk about, and never that I just design clothes. I'm not an environmentalist, and I'm still learning, just trying to do the best that I can. We just try to work with materials that are pre-existing, dead stock or vintage, and just try and create really interesting design details and quirks. Sustainability just naturally happened." And I think it's really good to end on that note, because she's more than a sustainable designer, and there's so many rich cultural references to her work. And what actually inspired me to make this video was, I remember when she became an LVMH Prize finalist, a lot of the kickback that I saw on social media were people talking about, "Oh, she just makes patchwork sweatshirts. Like, why is she win the LVMH Prize? Like, her work isn't that good. Why does she always get pushed?" So I really wanted to make a video where I kind of break down her work, the cultural references, so people can actually see and catch these nuances in her work. And because I think so many people have focused on the sustainability, that how good of a designer she is in terms of how she's able to reference her culture kind of got lost in translation. So I kind of want to peel back the narrative in a way and give her the props that she's due. So on that note, tell me what you like about her work. Comment down below what you like about her work. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And of course, a ton of work goes into my videos. So if you want to support the channel financially, you can do so by subscribing to the Patreon. The link to that is in the description below. The Patreon costs $3 a month. And for $3 a month, you will help this channel in so many ways you cannot imagine. But on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed this long video on the work of Ahluwalia, and I hope that through this video, I have created a few fans of her work, but on that note, I'll be back with another video very soon.